Hello everybody, and welcome to a super quick little tutorial on how to draw a pine tree in 3 different styles that I was experimenting with. The colors I'm using for this drawing are phthalo green, Payne's gray, yellow ochre, and there's another one, burnt sienna. Burnt sienna I use a little bit in this painting. Well, let's get started with our 3 little trees. You see, I'm mixing my colors right now. I'm mixing my yellow ochre with my phthalo blue. It's a green shade of phthalo blue, but it's that blue with the ochre is gonna give me the green that I want, which is a natural green, a little bit more muted than the green you get straight out of the tube. And I start with a single downward slash. That downward slash isn't going to go all the way down to my trunk because most of the bottom of my trunk will be obscured. And now I'm just adding these little symmetrical branches. You just got to add tiny brush strokes to each little section. Try not to make, I made mine relatively uniform because I was going for sort of a stylized. I was drawing a pine tree as a background for some students in an art class I teach. We're decorating the tree for Christmas, so I wanted to make it a little bit of a stylized tree, not completely 100% accurate looking. So this one's very symmetrical, and I'm starting out with this lighter wash to start out with. And it starts at the top with a much higher concentration of the yellow ochre, and at the bottom you see I start adding in much higher doses of the phthalo blue. And this bottom layer I'm keeping pretty light, sort of grayish, not very bright at all yet. Those are going to be for my top layers. But you just make sure to put your branches wider as you get to the bottom of the tree and narrower as you get to the top. And I see a lot of times when my students are drawing symmetrical things like this is they don't make them, see where I'm making this a little too symmetrical, they make it not symmetrical enough. You need to make sure the branches on either side are about the same length at the top and at the bottom, and then widening as you get toward the base of the tree. And I'm getting a little bit of brown here and peeking my trunk through here in the middle. My, this does go by fast. This was such a quick little experiment. This was just an experiment I did trying to decide what style of tree I wanted to paint this background for my students. And this was my first tree. This was actually pretty close to the tree that I went with because I liked the style the most, and because you guys voted for it. Those of you who follow me on social media, you guys voted for this tree pretty overwhelmingly. And now I'm just adding in some darker tones at the bottom, in the shadows here, where the tree is going to be in shadows. And I'm outlining a couple of vague branch shapes that you would see poking out straight towards you, because the tree's not only going to have branches to the right or the left of where you see it, it's going to have branches coming towards you from your perspective too. So I'm using some shadows to sort of suggest that 3-dimensional pop of the branches coming out toward me. After you get your first layer down, you just go in with some darker tones. You can start with a medium tone and then work your way up to darker tones, but you just add little bits of contrast here and there wherever the shadowiest parts of the tree is. And now I'm going to add, I like that first tree, looks pretty done, so I've got the second one coming in here now. The second one, I wanted to do the branches in a downward angled direction. So I'm making sure all of my brush strokes are going in that downward facing direction, because that represents your pine needles and your little pine branches, and everything on this type of pine tree that I was looking at here was downward sloping. So you got to make sure to make your brush strokes follow those contours. And it had a little bit of a more sectional shape to the branches, so I try to draw out these branches in a sort of sectional way before I filled them in more. And again, I'm using, it looks like more of a solid green for this one than the shading I did going down for the last one. It turned out alright, but I could have added some more color variance to this first layer here, but whereas everyone said that the first tree looked very happy, the second tree, I don't know, does the second tree look sad to you? I don't know. I don't think it looks sad. I think he's happy in his droopiness. He doesn't have to be a perky tree. He can be a droopy tree if he wants to. And now I'm taking in my darker paint and I'm shadowing the lower section of each of these clumps of branches that I've got here in my pine tree. Your darkest tones are always going to be on the underside of the tree because the sun obviously is shining from the top, and you're going to have all your deep shadows the further the branch goes into the tree and on the underside of the branch mostly. I think here I was still thinking of adding in some snow, but I decided against it because I didn't want to take away from the ornamentation the students were going to add in. This was the tree actually that I started really having to hold myself back from making the design too complicated. This is a very simple tree, and I wanted it to be a very simple tree so that it didn't take away from the students' contributions. But this isn't even the tree that we used for that. This is just an experiment. These trees here represent actually the first time I've ever tried to draw a pine tree. Well, I mean, I suppose I've done those pine trees you see on the horizons of like dramatic sunset paintings, you know, the ones that are just little black triangle shapes. But as far as drawing an actual pine tree goes, this is my first attempt. That's why I really wanted to experiment a little before I made my final tree. This is like a pine tree study. And now when I put in my trunk, also make sure not to forget to shade in your trunk too. Your trunk's going to be the darkest where it's closest to the tree because the branches are going to overhang the trunk. The biggest tip anyone can ever give you when it comes to making your art better or drawing better or painting better or anything like that is to pay attention to where the shadows fall and where the light hits. That's really the biggest thing you can do. And try and accurately represent those, or as accurately as you feel like it. You know, photorealism isn't for everybody. There, looks like my second tree's coming pretty good. Now, this third one I really wanted to do just extra stylized for fun, I guess, for fun. So I started out with a very dramatic zigzag, you see. Nice zigzaggy shape. And then I just started filling in other little brush swatches and brush shapes. So I decided to have fun with this last tree, and I think you should too. Pine trees are a pretty simple shape, so really let yourself just explore the shape of a pine tree, because there are so many different breeds and types and styles and sizes of pine tree that it doesn't really matter if yours don't look like mine or don't look like the whatever pine tree you might be looking at. It's still a great pine tree, I bet you. And here I'm doing the same process as with the other two. I start with my light layer first, and then I go in with darker layers and start adding in my shadowy branches and my tiny little pine branches. I liked this tree, although I was in quite a rush by the time I got here, and by the time, you'll see when you get to my final picture here at the end of the video, that I smeared part of it with my hand, and that's something you have to really watch out for, is making sure your drawing is dry before, your painting is dry before you handle it too much, or you end up smearing paint all over the place. But I didn't go quite as unidirectionally with my brush strokes for this one. They're a little all over the place. They don't go in one direction or another. I just went nuts with this pine tree. It looks like he's having a party, I guess. Now here we're getting into what ended up being my favorite part of this pine tree, and I ended up incorporating this middle section of this third pine tree into my final pine tree that I drew a little bit later. And it was this branch outline technique that I was going for, just more purposefully outlining these branches that are sticking straight toward your perspective, just outlining them a little more dramatically and then shading it into the rest of the tree. Just careful single brush strokes. It's with a pine tree being such a basic shape, it's easy to rush it a little bit, but even with something like a pine tree, you want to just slow down and take your time. Figure out where you want the shadows to be and where you want the highlights to be before you just dive headfirst in your painting. Or dive, whatever feels right to you. Everyone's art is different. Your art is different from my art, and my art is different from other people's art. Hopefully anyways. We all like to hope that our art is different from other people's art. And now I'm just adding in some more shadows to these other trees as well. There's that branch. I hadn't really perfected this branch outlining technique for this third one, but I sure give it my best. And now we've mostly got these three trees. We've got the upswept one, the downswept one, and the one that's sort of all over the place. And they all turned out well. They were a good experiment. They were a good trial. And there's the finished drawing of these first three trees. And I asked you guys on social media which tree you preferred for the final piece that I was going to draw out for my students, and everyone really liked that first tree. There was a couple of other votes here and there, but that first tree was the definite winner. Anyways, thank you guys for watching my pine tree video, and check out the video right here up on the screen right now if you want to see the final large watercolor pine tree. I've got it right there. You can click right on it, and please subscribe and like my videos if you liked my videos, I guess. Thank you very much. Goodbye, you guys.